Hello, today is April 24th, 2024. This is first meeting for working group serving. Welcome everybody. Today on agenda, we have packed agenda. We have 1 hour, but it's misleading to think that we have a lot of time. So I will be very brief on introductions and stuff like that. So we picked this time for the meeting. It's really hard to find any good time. We only have two requests so far for APAC friendly meetings. I hope to get Slack going very soon, and on a Slack we can raise any concerns about this meeting time or adding new times. I know working group batch has alternating meetings between APAC and non-APAC meetings, so we can do the same, but we need to have people interested in that. So yeah, if you have feedback, we can take it on Slack, and I hope to get Slack going maybe early next week, as per steering committee at least. Okay, next topic is charter. If you have feedback on the charter, please comment there. We need to pick more chairs. We have one request to help with the chairmanship, and I'm not sure if the person is on this call right now. If you are here, please speak up. If you also want to co-chair, please let me know. And I mean, we need help organizing things. Anybody wants to speak up? Going once.
Yeah. Hi, this is Sanjay. I'm from NVIDIA. I just wanted to quickly say that we'll probably have somebody from NVIDIA participating as a co-chair in this. We're very interested to work in this work group.
Yeah, I'm happy to get help, especially NVIDIA is very well integrated in this problem, so good to have you.
Thank you.
So you will contact me somehow?
Sure, will do.
Thank you. Okay, Clayton, do you want to introduce a collection of requests and demands for Kubernetes?
Absolutely. So thanks everybody for showing up. I know I've talked to a number of you and we've had, there's a good long thread. I tried to capture anything that came up in the thread, but I came into this with biases. So my unbiasing here would be, there's a lot of things that we can do. And I picked something that, is personally important to the folks I work with. It's a big, exciting area, but it is not intended to be exclusive to that. I think working group batch started off as a focused yet intending to go pretty broad in the bringing batch to Kubernetes. And while there's a lot of focus on accelerated inference here, we talk about AI. I think that if we stay too narrow, then there'll be a risk. So we want to balance that. And so I wanted to open this up for folks on the call. If you want to comment directly, we've laid out, kind of an initial proposal, which is improving accelerated inference on Kubernetes with the goal of lifting all boats for serving. So anything that improves the reliability and advances the state of the art of hosting serving workloads, web apps, web services, I think is reasonably within scope. And then we've kicked out batch and said that working group batch's problem. The three questions I have here, the first one, is there anything that folks would believe that we need to go after that isn't covered? And if folks want to step up, we didn't arrange for a poll or anything, but opening now the floor. If there's something important to you that isn't covered, bring it up or bring it up in the docs.
I'm not sure if, hi, this is Kevin. I'm not sure if it's here, but I think it's confusing to me, like the interaction of batch, the accelerators, serving, and they're all feeding the same feature, or they might be feeding similar features to, SIG node or SIG apps. And like, is the expectation that we sort of attend all of these and kind of consolidate them?
I'll take a stab. John, I know you're here if you wanna bring up a comment along that thread or a new comment, but I would say our goal is to represent serving workloads on Kubernetes. There is no one representing those workloads today, and there hasn't been a focused effort in that for quite a while. There's a lot of diffuse efforts. And so if you've managed to get something in the cube in the last 5 years that improves the state of the art of serving, this is not a knock on you. This is batch did such a great job, and I am totally confident in the device working group to draw requirements, but I don't think, Kubernetes succeeded because it made web services standard for everybody. And that is something that I don't think anyone owns right now. And so I'm proposing this group own that mission. It falls within a bunch of requisite SIGs. I don't want to overlap as much with batch. I think we should be feeding requirements and focused on things that device accelerator won't be driving. So we should have a really clear list of requirements. John?
Yeah, so the way I see it, it's a good question, Kevin. Like, there's already so many meetings. I was very hesitant actually to even suggest the device management thing because of exactly that issue. But I believe there really are two different sets of requirements here. One is really workload focused on what what do the end users need to support these types of workloads, and that comes from both serving and from batch. And then lower layer, the lower level piece is the device management piece, which is really about like, how do we select these devices, configure these devices, choose a set of devices to affect a workload, and we'll get requirements from this group. That's my expectation. Is like one of the requirements I've heard from this group already, just verbally, and I don't know if it's in the documents yet, is, hey, I want to be able to specify in my request to Kubernetes, I could use this one larger GPU, or I could use these two smaller GPUs. I don't care which. I mean, I prefer to get the one large one, but if there's none available, I'll take the two small ones. So that's a requirement from this group, from the end user saying, this is the kind of thing I want to be able to do. And then to the device management group, which is trying to say, what do I, how can I meet that requirement?
Eduardo or Kevin? Well, Kevin, do you want to?
Eduardo has his hand up first. I'll let him go.
Oh, sorry, wrong Kevin. I don't know how to raise my hand. Sorry. So if I can be after these two, please remember me.
Okay. Eduardo?
Okay. Yeah, I have two questions. One is, I would like us to very, very well define what is serving, because like just on the last comment from John, it's like utilizing GPUs to me it still feels like a bash problem, right? So we need to have a very well defined what is serving, and kind of like pointing out that this is for AI ML inferencing, because at some point it's going to be very narrow to differentiate between batch and everything that is bash, right? Like even scientific computing, to serving, right? Like, and it goes it goes also to the many meetings. Like I'm already attending meetings for even CNCF has like 2 or 3 working groups for the same. So if we manage to differentiate this very well, so we can move from a meeting of WG serving to a meeting to bash, WG bash, right? And not being confused on that. And my second question is, how do we want to track the progress of this working group? Are we thinking on like running ML commons on Kubernetes and seeing if the ideas that we are going to champion here are going to make running ML commons better on Kubernetes, or like what are going to be our metrics in this group?
So I'll take a very, very, very basic stab at the first question you asked, because this has been something we've discussed for 10 years. If your pod says restart always, you are a serving workload. If your pod has restart never or restart on failure, you are a batch workload. And that is the ultimate reductionist argument. And then there's the inverse, which I think you talked about accelerated inference. I think accelerated inference that is not batch inference is a great starting point. But there are people who run serving in pod restart never, and there are people who run batch in stateful sets. And so I do agree we need to get that crisp definition. That should be in our charter, and it should be in the in scope, out of scope. And I think we should stay focused, I totally agree. Which is the next, Kevin?
I guess I'm technically started. I mean, I'm just raised my hand to say, I mean, I agree with the use case for this. I talked with Aldo about this from working group batch, kind of just a concern of how to keep in context of all these conversations going on. But I think clarifying this helps, and I mean, everyone's feeding these keps to Signode or whoever anyway. So I think if you've been around the Kubernetes community for a little while, it's kind of clear how things actually get done. But I think for new people, defining this is going to be kind of helpful. That's all.
Kevin?
Yeah, it's unusual. There's usually not a lot of Kevins, but yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, maybe echo what John was saying a minute ago with the way I see these three working groups interacting is that the accelerator management working group is going to define the abstractions that the other two working groups will end up consuming at the end of the day. And that's why it's so important that we get some of the feedback, some of the requirements from these other groups so that, you know, I understand and I know how I want to be able to advertise GPUs in Kubernetes using something like DRA. But just because I have this idea of how to do that and how I think the best way to do that is, doesn't mean that that's something you guys actually want to be able to consume or use in that way, right? So we need to make sure that we're aligned with, you know, producing what you guys actually want and not just building something because it gives us every feature we'd ever want to be able to produce, and then you guys don't even consume half of them. So
that is an amazing way to frame it too, Kevin, because I think we want to actually create that. The best format is a push and pull where no one's perfectly happy, but everyone on average is happier. Like you know, Tim has talked about that a long time in the history of Kubernetes talks. I think there've been some of the most successful outcomes have been like push and pull between make a bunch of things possible, like add that flexibility that really roots why Kubernetes is so successful. And then there's another group which is like that's too flexible. You know, certainly there's a lot of people who say like we were too flexible or we didn't go far enough with device manager and with CPU management. And so I think like that's one topic. Having really concrete high level grounding where you just don't have to worry about most of these details as a workload team, I think is what I think. If you're running a production workload that's intended to take traffic and you want to worry about SLOs and latency, you want Kubernetes to hide most of the details. But what details get hidden, I think, is what this working group should suggest as input to accelerators.
Yeah, and I'll just to say, like, I agree with this philosophy, right? And like I said, this working group, serving working group, is one of the inputs, but batch is also an input. But the vendors like NVIDIA and others are input. The end users who might directly consume these things as opposed to consuming them through a workload controller are inputs. The cluster administrators are inputs, and the Kubernetes vendors like Google and Red Hat and Amazon, like and Microsoft, we're all providing inputs as well. Like and exactly, not everybody's going to be happy with everything we come up with, but hopefully it will solve most of the problems for most people, and that's the goal.
Marius asked, will inference runtimes management be in the scope of this working group? I think, and you know, there's a number of folks working in this space. We've got Kserve as a project. There's the Kaito project. There's Selden. There's a bunch of others. There's a bunch of people who've built things on top of Kubernetes. I have a personal opinion that I think is open to debate and discussion. I think it should be within scope of Kubernetes to help standardize orchestration of inference servers and the inference workload in general in partnership with Kserve, and try to find the common elements that everyone can agree on, or that by putting them in Kubernetes, they make everything better. Like stateful sets was a great starting point. And then people went and created thousands and thousands of operators of varying quality and operational complexity. That is a success. I think there's things that we can do better than that. And I, you know, aspirationally, I'd like to see us try to advance the state of art of standardizing operational concerns in Kubernetes. I don't think the answer should be you have to write one operator for every type of use case, but I also don't think it's within our remit to say the only way that you can run inference looks like this. So I would say there are things that when Kubernetes was created that people said, oh, that's the responsibility of this or that, right? This is a config management problem. You shouldn't get involved in doing rollout of new versions of code because that's a config management problem. I think everybody kind of needs a rollout mechanism. I think most people, this is one of the use cases, just as an example, but everyone doing inference on Kubernetes needs an A/B mechanism. We have projects like Gateway, which is trying to be a standard. There are people who will not use Gateway or will deliberately choose to run something else. And I think that flexibility is important. So as an example, it is probably within scope to have the discussion, and then we should figure out a way to scope it down so that we're making things that most people can benefit from. That's a very long-winded way of answering your question, Marius, but like, I don't think we will just kick out by default the idea that there are workload abstractions that could benefit 90% of people running inference on Kubernetes. I see other comments. Anyone else want to bring anything up in this section? Like, I think we hit on a couple of the general topics, and I think on those are for defining serving should go in the charter. Tracking progress, Eduardo, that's a great one. I think we'll put that in the charter as well. I think that should be part of the charter discussion. And so I'll take a follow-up with Sergey and we'll get that going. So there's maybe one working group, which is definition of the group. And then these other topics that I'm raising or that we're raising here, I think are predicated on scope definition. So I think our goal probably is to get a charter in place that everyone feels is reasonable, and then to define any of the vagueness in that charter. Okay.
Jeff in the chat said that he had some comments from end user perspective. Is it something you want to talk about now, or?
Probably like brief expectation from the working group side. Yeah, this is Jiaxin. I'm from ByteDance. So I'm currently working on the LLM inference infrastructure in my company. So I think recent experiences I have is I hope the working group serving can probably define some standards at the beginning. So one lesson is from the working group batch. I think and scheduling. Originally, we have like different projects like Volcano or Q or different projects. They create their own queue concept or and pod group concept. There is no standard interface, which makes our work in-house work very hard because we need to adapt different solutions for different use cases. Like in working group serving, I hope this standardization could happen as soon as possible. For example, defining the unit for the distributed serving, also take the auto scaling and rolling upgrade into the consideration. I think that's a lesson we hope working group serving to join from getting the experiences from the working group batch. And another part is since this area grows really fast, disaggregate, prefill, and decoding disaggregation, introduce a lot of new challenges on the infrastructure side. So we are inventing some wheels internally, but we hope working group serving can give some help to also standardize those components, because that makes I think the projects involve faster, and we don't have other projects need to kind of have a lot of overlap features. Yeah, so that's the purpose. I think we expect the working group to drive. Yeah.
And I'll say, I have a bias, and I'll put my biases up front. I would love to see us try to drive and build consensus that we could call standard. And I'm also very keenly aware that the best standards are the ones that either are so, the people participating in them are building them de facto, right? Kubernetes is a de facto standard. It wasn't, we never set out to standardize. We just set out to really nail the container orchestration problem. I want to make sure that this working group is a place where everyone who is actively doing what you're doing is deploying inference on Kubernetes and has strong opinions about what the right thing is to do in these cases, or has the experience to say, you know, there's 3 alternatives. It doesn't actually matter because they're all basically the same. It'd be best if we could all pick one of them so that other things could depend on it. That's like, I think, like queuing. There's lots of ways to do queuing. The absence of having a central queuing mechanism means that multiple batch frameworks can't share queuing, I think is a great example of if we can share things that benefit multiple. So like the one concrete example I have, you know, is Kaito has presets for, you know, saying like, hey, I want to simply define this model and this model server and just roll it out. Kserve has serving classes, which is just a string, and then you have to go implement in the Kserve project. I think one thing I'd kind of been hoping for is that when there's a pattern for model plus model server plus solving a particular problem, we could orchestrate that kind of a consistent way so that we could bolt on disaggregated serving, right? There could be 1 or 2 disaggregated serving orchestration approaches would be awesome, because then the rest of us could say, great, we'll go use that, provide feedback, provide use cases. So I think this group, I think, yeah, we want to get the really strong experience and a really strong use case and make the case that we can either, you know, propose a project that people just adopt, making it de facto, or we can get agreement between multiple parties that this is the right way to do something and go after it. Abdullah?
I think, like, at least from like experience with working group batch, we took a bottom-up approach. Like we anchored on the job API. We built, you know, something around it like job set to basically enhance what it has, and then queue on top. But my sense is that as we go, you know, layers, higher layers, it will be in less and less consensus, right? So yeah, I mean, I think taking a bottom-up approach might help us define those building blocks that could form some consensus, and then people can compose them in whichever way they want. But we also provide some, you know, perhaps not best practices, but like, you know, reasonable orchestration on top, or like composability on top, right? Like, for example, again, the building block here could be the deployment, and then we've been working like on leader worker set, which is a form of deployment for a specific use case like multi-host, and then the stateful set. So this is your bottom layer, and then on top of that, okay, what is the building block for doing model rollouts? What is the building block for doing traffic splitting? What is the building block, you know, for all these, like, you know, separate features? And then on top of it as well is what, like Clayton was mentioning about, like inference class, and then there's an API that composes all these things together in a more like unified fashion. So I guess my point here, I'm skeptical that we will get to the point where we have that, like, you know, strong high-level standard, but I'm hopeful that we can come up with, like, you know, building blocks. And that's what I'm saying, like bottom up, that will become part of the standards or more consensus that will help people compose more complex solutions.
So taking some notes just from the chat. So going back, Kevin's question on certain API, I think the stateful set or leader worker set building blocks, that's what Abdullah is referencing. So I think within our charter is we want to improve the building blocks that will be necessary. And then there's maybe then to close out that comment, we want to find the new building blocks that aren't just about workload orchestration, but like in the traffic domain. I see a comment about auto scaling and slow scale up. I think auto scaling is within scope. I've been certainly talking to a lot of folks on the HPA team about ways that we can improve the general problem. You know, HPA is designed for CPU workloads. It's not designed for inference workloads. And so we need to, at this working group, I think should propose improvements that would make slow startup as a problem better for HPA, but we should also feel it's within scope to suggest improvements to HPA that would adapt to what's novel about, LLMs versus regular web app serving. Like LLMs are compressible. You can send more and more load and you just pay more latency up to a certain point that you really can't do with on CPU driven applications, because you'll blow out your context, you'll context switch the whole time and get no work done. So the failure modes are different. I think it's within our scope to do both of those. So Sam, if you could make sure you comment on the use cases doc as well. Marius, and queue-based scaling versus request-based scaling. I think both of those, we've kind of kicked batch out, or said like batch inference using batch primitives is a batch problem. I know a lot of people who implement batch inference through queuing. And I do think that we should not, the intent was not to kick out all use cases that might be queue driven, whether that's a queue, like a simple request queuing, or whether that's an actual event-based queue mechanism. I think we should, consider that use cases along those lines. But again, that would be accelerated inference if scaling up something on a queue is slow or scaling up something on request traffic is slow. I think both of those are within scope. Marius, I don't know what you mean by serving a pod-centric problem. I don't know if you wanted to critique something I was saying or what the question was focused on. Any other comments? So maybe Sergey, what we can do is we have the use cases doc, which is very heavily drafted, and I've got feedback from a number of people, but it's by no means exhaustive. Please add, and I'll go create a section at the end, which is like new topics, new areas. Please add stuff in there, and then I'll add a section for clarification, and we'll try to do a round of distributed use case gathering. I think maybe for the next group or for the next meeting, I'd like to come in and kind of have a pretty strong opinion on charter and a pretty strong opinion on a broad set of use cases that we can start to form work streams out of. And I took a stab at the work streams just based on what, initial feedback, but those are two drafts. So Sergey, do you want to cover the what we promised to John and DRA for 1 through 1?
So I think one thing we need to tell is this use cases that written here are like relatively high level, so they are going a little bit deeper than just let's do inference. So they say specific problems that inference experience, but they may not be specific enough that can be converted into caps that individual SIGs can implement. So once like this use cases document is basically outline of our problems, what we try to solve, and what we need to address long term. And then this document with work streams, it's mostly about splitting these use cases into specific work streams, and maybe individual people more interested in specific work stream, and they contribute to this work stream. And out of this work stream, the idea is to get a very specific set of basically step-by-step requirements. Like this is what we want to schedule. This is how like config may look like, and this is what we expect individual SIGs doing. Like autoscaler do this, and node doing this, and like scheduler doing this work, and the array scheduled this way. So to be as specific as possible, so individual SIGs can suggest, like, I mean, it may be a new feature, or maybe it fits into some other features they're building. So yeah, these are work streams. And the one important part of it, of work streams, because of the schedule, like I put a schedule, like tentative schedule for 131 and 132. The big idea right now is that we want to have something for 131, but if we want anything for 131, we need to start yesterday. By mid-May or mid-June, there will be enhancement freeze, and SIGs needs some time to approve this enhancement. So we're talking about like maybe 2 weeks before, like beginning of June, we need to have a cap written down. So ideally this week or maybe late next week, we need to have a clearly spelled requirement for 131, and from which 6 can start writing cap. Yeah, John.
Yeah, thanks for calling that out. So this is something I mentioned in our other working group last week. Like, we're actively like iterating on prototypes right now for what the 131 APIs for DRA might look like, or for device management more generally. We have certain requirements we're aware of from what DRA has been doing all along, plus like partitionable devices to support MIGs. These things come from like device vendors, primarily NVIDIA, but we want to get these requirements like now from this group so that, because basically our goal is to have something in beta in 132, which means it has to be an alpha in 131, which means that, it has to be, or it's impossible, right? Much less, even if it's an alpha in 131, it's a stretch. And so backing the time up, yeah, we have basically 2-3 weeks, maximum 4 weeks to come to agreement, because there's only like 4 weeks between KEP freeze and code freeze. We're going to need to be working on this stuff before KEP freeze, right? So we have to come to agreement really soon. So obviously it starts with requirements. If we don't get them in the next week or 2 weeks, we're probably not going to be able to meet them.
Okay, yeah. And out of this, I try to spell out some ideas that may contribute to this 131 track. And I want more ideas, like if people on the call have like something that bothers them for a long time and it seems to be a quick win for everybody, you can put it here and we can see if there is enough enthusiasm to support it. And one scenario for DRA specifically is this pod spec that can define multiple GPU specs, so it can work on either this type of GPU or that type of GPU. So it will be scheduled on whatever left in terms of accelerators. So this one is, I think DRA will cover the scenario, and
so the question becomes, okay, there's a few different ways we can address this, and I don't know if we want to go into the detail here. I'm happy to do it, but like when you say depending on the capacity, what does that mean? Right? Does that mean we need to look at? Does that mean it's in the user's control? So one way I can imagine doing this is that you make a claim for a GPU. And sorry if my network I've been having, it seems to be spotty, but you can make a claim that says, I need a GPU, or I need GPU capacity for 64 gigs of GPU memory. And then we could look at your other things, like we have what we call the device class or the resource class, that kind of refines the selection criteria, and we could decide whether we need one use for that. Alternatively, if we don't want to go to that level of detail, we could, for example, allow you to make a claim that lists multiple classes. So the first class could have criteria for a larger GPU. The second class could have criteria for smaller GPUs, but allow multiple. And so that becomes a preferential list. So those are two totally different APIs to solve the same problem. And which one we take may come down to some of the details in what your requirements are. So I'd love to get like a click or 2 clicks down from this one bullet to more like what exactly you need. And there's probably like 4 other solutions to that. Those are just 2 top of mind ones.
So just as a procedural, like we were kind of in chat saying like, hey, we could go do auto scaling as a very concrete work stream, because both Sam and Junjin have really concrete use cases, and I've been working with a few folks. We can kind of bring together work stream. Do we want to create like a follow-up small meeting where we we gather input, and then anyone who can join wants to, and we hash through maybe like the first three and talk about experience and end user and what we know and don't know, just as like a practice run on that. Because I think not everybody understands DRA's current state, and so it's almost a group virtual whiteboarding just to, you know, maybe 30 minutes or 45 minutes is a work stream effort to say, okay, here's what y'all think we should do, and then somebody who doesn't know DRA says, that's the most disgusting thing I've ever heard in my life. I hate you forever, and may your face erupt in acne or whatever, you know, whatever the curse from old times would be. Because I put this one in because it's not so concrete that I'm confident I know what the DRA approach is, but I have a very strong opinion of what I don't want to do. Like, so maybe this is like, we can do like some of those small tests for this one and the next two, like failure detection and mitigation is actually a great example. And then we've got a couple of faster bootstrap that I know have been added. Kevin?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if we do this, I could volunteer to give a brief overview of the state of DRA as it exists today, just as kind of an intro to the conversation. And then we could see if it already solves what you need, and if not, we can at least have a framing for the conversation of, well, what could we add or how could we change it?
Yeah, like
It's probably the best place to start.
Kind of an iteration between use case, here's how we would solve it with DRA, current proposal, here's how we've thought about solving it. Someone who doesn't know DRA saying, but what about? And then we say, okay, but that's the current state. Well, what would we want the ideal state? We can make a decision on, you know, this would be a, you know, oh, we were thinking about doing that later, or we hadn't thought about that. And then maybe like 2 iterations of that.
Yep, makes sense to me.
One of the for me to bring this topic here is just to sense how many people is it actually interested in this scenario. Is it resonates with anybody? Is anybody on the call wants to speak up?
Well, I'll say that we get requests for this quite often. Not necessarily in the, so I'll echo what John said about capacity is a bit of a vague term here, but we get people saying, you know, the main thing there's two dimensions that people care about. Either they care about how much memory they know they're going to consume, or they want to make sure that they get enough compute resources, and memory is not as much of a concern. But you know, there's two classes of people that have these requirements too. Some say, I don't want to run at all unless you can give me this. Others say, well, I'll run with degraded performance or with a lesser amount if that's all that's possible. And there's no good way right now to express that in any of the APIs that we have, where it's a kind of a, you know, here's the minimum I want and here's the maximum that that I'd like to have ideally.
And I went through like this one showed up because I went through yours, Kevin, and I said, what are the ones that we've actually had people who've gone and done this? So the great example actually was, you know, due to capacity limits and everybody's trying to scrounge, you know, GKE had L4s pretty early on, and 2 L4s can actually run a large class of inference models of the smaller size, maybe not exactly as well as an A100 40 gig. But like it was a valid trade-off. And so we had a team that went and did some benchmarking, and they showed the two next to each other. And then I said, why would I want to ever, like the difference is I need 2 L4s and 1 A100 on the medium size model. So like we had a very concrete, like, you know, those were valid alternatives. And then the question I was kind of going through my head, and I think this is what we'll do in the work thing, and be like, why would I ever want to specify 2 deployments for that? And I wouldn't, because I would have to have 2 deployments, 2 auto scaling groups. I would have to roll them out at the same time, where like, you know, you scale up one depending on what you have. And so instead it was, I want to say that both of these are acceptable, and admin still has to go give me both A100s or L4s. So I think we could work through this one and then refine down. It was the closest one I could find in the use cases to something that we had people who had experience on.
It's kind of up-leveling the requirements. So you don't care exactly what GPUs you get. You just want to make sure that whatever you get is able to solve your use case for the constraints that you've written down.
Yeah,
that's
how to reduce the
I mean.
operational burden. Yeah, the orchestration burden on the person who would then, their alternative, like they have an alternative, it's 2 of everything. And then when they try to do A/B, they'll have 4 of everything. And then when somebody comes along and tries to do an experiment, they'll have 6 of everything, or whatever it is. So that was kind of I was trying to walk down that sequence of events to what did compose well with that. What else had to change that we could say, no, if cube hides this, then things above don't have to worry about all the details. John, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. One of the sort of goals in the workgroup device management is to allow the workload authors to specify sort of their minimum constraints, right? Like, and let the system figure it out under the subject of the regulation of by cluster admins. But like, I don't want the user to have to know exactly how all the hardware is set up in order to specify their workload requirements, because they often don't really care about that. This is exactly an example of where they may not care about that. They may need to, their workload may need to adjust, right? Their workload may need to wake up and say, oh, I've got 4 GPUs, not 1. I need to do something differently. But like from a user point of view, if their workload can handle that, they should be able to allow it to be satisfied by any of the different things that are available.
And so then to add something that we haven't really brought up in the call that you just touched on, John, is we talked about the interplay between like, having these hardware capabilities and consuming them. The interplay that you just mentioned, John, is that an important, most Kubernetes are run by a platform team and whatever, however that's defined, who makes capacity available. The way that they do that in many aspects today, whether it's on cloud or on premise, is that team brings hardware, they put it in machines, they come up with node labels. Sometimes they use labels that are convention that many people use. Sometimes they don't. They overlay other operational concerns, like, it just so happens that all of the GPUs in the DMZ are A100s. And so, somebody just does the shorthand and they say this workload needs to run on nodes that are labeled as being DMZ true. And no one encoded that there's actually need an A100 in there. And as a consequence, no one can ever move those out of the DMZ without knowing about that. So platform admins define APIs of how hardware is exposed. What can we do as a community to rationalize that is within scope of, I think, serving ultimately, as well as batch. And it's probably like, I think we'll probably push it to accelerator management to some degree, but it's the problem of, how do you make classes of hardware available that admins can still make choices? And we don't take away too much. Like if someone can explicitly say, I want this, this, and this, that's great. But that also restricts or takes away some platform admin ability to manage, well, maybe I don't want you to use A100s because they're too expensive, and I want you to use H100s because I have a glut of them. Or I'm running, I'm trying to decommission all my A100s. If suddenly I have to go and change every workload in every team to switch from saying I require A100 to I require H100, you've created a platform admin cost. So I don't know that we capture that in the serving use cases, but I do think I want to make sure we mention the 3 roles, the workload author, the platform admin, and then the person who on the platform side then has to make sure that the right capacity, like the capacity planner, we don't maybe have a great name for that, but it's the interplay between what we expose, how you control that exposure for various operational reasons, and how you consume that from the workload.
So we spent quite some time on this, and then I put some other 131 things that may be interested, and you see my sig node bias here. It's all pretty much like what will happen on the node, like what the GPU fails, like how do we mark a pod that is clearly understandable that it's a GPU failure, and some ideas for faster bootstrap as well. Some of them were discussed, some of them are new, but ultimately just list of what we can do from sig node perspective as a quick win that will help everybody and kind of lift all the boards at the same time. If you have ideas from other groups, maybe you can put it here as well, so we can try to understand which ideas will go faster and which we can actually get into 131. Yeah.
So then just to summarize, we've got two proposed work stream tracks that are very concrete, one for auto scaling. I noted that under the action section, and one for DRA. Please put your interested parties. And John, if you could put a concrete date for very soon. What is the hard deadline for DRA input? Do we want to define it as middle of next week?
I mean, it all depends, right? Like, if it's a minor tweak, we maybe, or if it's an input and we go, oh, well, we're already going to support that, right? But if it's like some crazy ass requirement we haven't seen before, we could run into trouble. So I would give me, let's say, yeah, like the end of next week, would be best. So that's what I've asked for from like people in general. But unfortunately, I need to follow up with people because we haven't really seen a lot of traction in our use case documents. It's still just Kevin driving everything.
Well, I mean, practically speaking, that's how Kubernetes has been for the last 10 years. There's somebody who's stubborn enough to push the boulder uphill. So folks on the call who aren't familiar with DRA, is there a doc that's the best intro that we have right now for describing how DRA current state is? Kevin, is it something from KubeCon? Is there anything newer? Is it John's doc of the ideal state? What's the best thing for people here to read to then come and know what to suggest to the list of 131 items?
So there's the KEPs, obviously, which are comprehensive but also quite dense to get into. For current state, it might be a little difficult beyond the KEPs, but I do have my presentation from KubeCon last November and the one from last April in Amsterdam that go through the details of what is DRA, how does it all work using the traditional model before we switch to this new structured parameters model. So at least in terms of motivation and what you can get out of having something like DRA, I think those two presentations are probably the best starting point. I'm obviously biased because I gave those talks, but they're a lot less dense than trying to jump right into the KEP, I think.
Okay, so we'll try
the
to.
other thing I might suggest is to look at my document, but not the details of the model I proposed, but more the high level motivation and like the first couple sections. The details of the model are going to change. And that's what we're iterating on right now. And like we're simplifying it compared to what's in that document quite a bit. Some of those features may not be necessary. Topology we're likely not going to address, or we're going to address only in a very minimal way in 131, things like that. So, but I think it does give motivation. Like if you look at the working group's charter and you look at that document and just take it as a directional thing, as opposed to a detailed thing, that was probably useful. I think actually even on the Kate's docs, there's stuff about DRA and it's integrated with structure parameters.
Okay, so one real quick note, all of the docs are shared with dev@kubernetes.io for commenting, just in the off chance. So everyone should already have comment access if you're in the dev Kubernetes org. When we have the working group membership in that, all the docs will be shared with edit for that. But we're not at that point yet. So just, I added that comment at the top, Sergey. So then John, I've got those two captured. I'll add the links in, and we've got the auto scaling as a work stream. So folks should add themselves as your interested party, and then we'll try to get something scheduled for that. Is there any other, and then we discussed the charter, is there any other key burning questions besides deciding who we are and the input to SIG or to DRA, and then our first attempt that folks would like to do? Is it when's our next meeting?
I guess the one thing I don't know with the work stream, but part of the hard part I find about contributing with the GPU work and serving is I don't have access to GPU. So does anyone have like maybe we could consider like a simple end-to-end workflow of what serving looks like from like a CPU, so developers could iterate on these ideas?
That is a great idea. We have there's a bunch of projects in the ecosystem. One of the things I've been working on was like a framework for simulating model servers. and emulating their behavior without actually requiring an accelerator. So just mirroring back. I think DRA has similar things. We want to, maybe that's a really concrete thing that it's not just, we don't just need stubs. We need to enable people to develop and test realistic things in realistic ways, when hardware capacity is the single greatest limiter to any of this development right now. So I think we probably want to work with others who've already done this. Kevin or John, is there anything that you guys have come up with since the last DRA meeting about making it easy for people to test this stuff in isolation? I know it was a thread.
Nothing since the last meeting. I mean, I think we have some, right, from the point of view of the Kubernetes machinery, like we don't need real GPUs that actually do real GPU stuff. What we need is, allocation and actuation, like the driver. I think Kevin already has a driver that can do, just inject environment variables, just does something, right? I think
it's on the SIG. There's a repo on the SIG. What's it called? Kubernetes SIGs, whatever the organization is, called DRA example driver. I can drop a link to it, but yeah, it's basically, it implements everything that a real driver would do. It just doesn't have hardware that it connects to. And instead of actually preparing hardware to do something, it just injects a set of environment variables into your container to kind of prove that the whole process worked correctly. But it does go through all the machinery of, seeing what claims you've created, relying on a resource class, wiggling out potentially any bugs in the kubelet calls out to this external plugin, the controller running in the background. All that stuff works as if it was, a production driver. It just doesn't actually work with real hardware under the hood.
So I think, Kevin, this is absolutely going to be a work stream, because for us to be able to test improvements, we need pretty accurate simulation. And quite frankly, the Kubernetes project can't afford to use GPUs right now in EDE testing for every PR. So we'll have to get really clever about how we do this. And I think this is worth a strong investment. Any other last minute topics? I really appreciate everybody's time. Anything that's burning issue that can't wait for? Sergey's got the chat coming. We don't have a mailing list yet, but we will once.
Yeah, I hope
we
we
get
are.
that.
Yeah, we'll get it. Okay.
All right.
So we currently scheduled for every week meeting. Next week, I hope we can get some more ownership for areas and maybe report the progress for these two topics as well. Thank
And
you,
anyone interested in sharing, reach out to Sergey. I forgot to put that in the notes. All right.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.